In this video, we're going to be doing something just a little bit different from the usual. We are going to be discussing the episodes of Deep Space Nine and Enterprise in which Section 31 appeared. I will give a synopsis of what happened in the episode, and then we will discuss the episode. And at the end, when I've done synopses for all episodes and we've discussed them, we will discuss the episodes all together and what we think that means for how Section 31 was portrayed in Star Trek Discovery and the upcoming Section 31, what do we want to call that, a movie? So, I guess I'll just get started. The first episode in which we were introduced to Section 31 was Star Trek Deep Space Nine, Season 6, Episode 18, Inquisition. Dr. Julian Bashir was getting ready to head to a medical conference. The day before he was to leave, Chief O'Brien came in to see him with a dislocated shoulder, which Julian put back into its proper place. The morning Julian is supposed to leave, Internal Affairs shows up on Deep Space Nine, looking for a traitor who has been passing information to the Dominion. The Inquisition is led by a man called Sloan. Sloan has it out for Julian because of Julian's time as a POW in a Dominion prison. Julian is accused of being the traitor. Long story short, when Julian encounters O'Brien with a perfectly healthy shoulder, Julian realizes everything he's been experiencing has been a simulation. Satisfied that Julian is loyal to the Federation, Sloan discloses that he belongs to a branch of Starfleet intelligence called Section 31. They search out and identify potential dangers to the Federation and quietly deal with them once identified. They're an autonomous department authorized under the original Starfleet Charter 200 years earlier. They act as judge, jury, and executioner, answerable to no one. They're looking for people who can sublimate their own ambitions for the good of the Federation. People like Julian Bashir. Julian turns down the offer to join up because the ends don't always justify the means. He disagrees with violating Starfleet principles in order to protect the Federation. Sloan insists that bending the rules saves lives, and that in time, Julian will come to agree with him. Julian tells Sloan not to hold his breath. Back on Deep Space Nine, Captain Sisko looks into Section 31, and Starfleet Command neither confirms nor denies their existence. Odo points out that the Romulans have the Tal Shiar. The Cardassians have the Obsidian Order. Why shouldn't Starfleet have their own version? Julian asks what it says about them if they're willing to sacrifice their principles in order to survive. It won't be easy to track down Section 31, but Sisko has an idea. He tells Julian that the next time Sloan tries to recruit him, that Julian should say yes. That was a very brief overview of what happened in that episode, as far as Section 31 is concerned. The way it was laid out in that episode was actually a bit chilling as far as this organization answerable to no one except themselves, basically rooting out what they see as threats to the Federation and eliminating them. It did not paint Section 31 in a very positive or flattering light in this episode, and our heroes in this story, Julian Bashir, Odo, Captain Sisko, and the like, they appear to be extremely concerned. Maybe disturbed might be a better word, as far as the existence of Section 31 and their activities. Sisko seems to be definitely concerned that the upper brass was unwilling to deny the existence of Section 31.
I do not like the Section 31 concept, even going back to Deep Space Nine. But at least in this episode, it was treated like perhaps this was some sort of rogue entity that got power and that they were setting up a trap to try to weed out this entity, and that it was basically a fold in bureaucracy that was never supposed to exist but somehow came to being. So this first episode didn't really cement Section 31 as a thing that was, I suppose, problematic in the Star Trek universe, because there was still the out there that this was just a rogue agency that once Starfleet higher-ups figured out they would shut this down.
Yeah, almost like an Illuminati that has taken it upon themselves to protect the Federation using the means that they thought were necessary, not necessarily endorsed by Starfleet.
Yeah, so this episode here, didn't really mind it because it kind of exposed the bureaucracy that can happen when you have one end of a bureaucracy not knowing what another end is doing and what funding is going where. Kind of speaks to our times that we're in now. I don't think any of us really get behind spy agencies doing horrible things, but at the same time, it's hard to prove the existence of them. So this episode for me, I didn't really have a problem with. I thought this was going to go somewhere that was going to root this out of Starfleet and out of the Federation as a cancer that needed to get removed. Unfortunately, that's not what happened. And I'll talk after you're done with all the synopses about chickens come home to roost when you do something like this and what Discovery did and what Section 31, that film, is going to do. The groundwork was laid here, even though this was done competently. Once you open that door, you're going to open the door for all sorts of things like this. So I didn't find this episode to be necessarily anything to worry about, but as you go on with the different episodes, I'm going to change my mind on that.
That being said, let's move on to the next episode. Deep Space Nine, Season 7, Episode 16. In this episode, Sloan reappears and uses Julian for a Section 31 operation. What we learn in this episode is that the Admiral Julian was working with to expose Section 31 knew about them all along and was actually working with them. That's pretty much all you need to know about that episode without going into the blow-by-blow of what actually took place. So this episode further cemented Section 31 as an organization that the top of Starfleet was very well aware of and was utilizing as they saw fit.
And this goes to the point of, I guess they were trying to explore what price do you have to pay for a free society. And for me, I don't understand why people get on board with this Section 31. Because the way I understood the Star Trek universe and how it was set up was after all the wars, after all the infighting on planet Earth, at least the Earthlings decided, well, they wanted a better way. They wanted to take all that energy and instead of using it for gathering resources and hoarding them and fighting amongst each other, they were going to work together and look toward the stars. So it was, to me, humanity growing up to this next level of consciousness. And when you introduce this Section 31, this 20th century model of government running, yeah, it seems realistic to us. Well, back then we were in the 20th century, but to me it kind of shakes what Star Trek was supposed to be about. But that's just my interpretation of how Star Trek was set up and why I don't think Section 31 is compatible with the Star Trek universe. I think there is something to explore about what price do you want to pay for this level of freedom, but at least when it came to Earth, Earth wanted to do something better. That's why they went off to the stars. They came together. They grew up as a species. Now, I realize the Federation and Starfleet is more of just planet Earth, and if they would have explored a little bit more of maybe these other planets that were pushing the envelope on this, wanting Section 31 and Earth pushing against it, maybe I would have been okay with this concept for a while, but that's not what happened. We just were supposed to assume that in order to have a society like Star Trek set up, that you just have to have as an evil an entity like Section 31. And I personally reject that notion outright. That's why Section 31 never worked for me after that first episode. But again, that's just my opinion.
That being said, we will move on to the next episode. Deep Space Nine, Season 7, Episode 23. Extreme Measures. Odo has a disease given to him by Section 31, in the hopes that he would infect the founders, which Captain Sisko correctly identifies as an attempt at genocide. So basically what's happened here is Section 31 has engineered a disease that will kill every one of Odo's kind to wipe them out. Lovely. Dr. Julian Bashir's research into a cure was going nowhere, so Julian sent a message to Starfleet saying he'd found a cure in an attempt to draw out Section 31, even though he had not found a cure. The idea being that Section 31 would come out of the shadows in order to destroy Julian's research. Julian and Chief O'Brien would then capture the Section 31 agent and force them to give up the cure by using a Romulan memory scanner, an item that is illegal in the Federation. Sloan shows up. Chief O'Brien and Dr. Bashir capture him. Rather than give up the cure, Sloan activates a neural depolarizing device in his brain to kill himself. O'Brien and Bashir then use a device to enter Sloan's dying mind and retrieve the cure, saving Odo. At the end of the episode, Sloan is dead, Odo is healed, and Bashir and O'Brien break into Quark's, drink some of his whiskey, and play darts. And they don't seem to have any bad feelings about killing Sloan in the process. So apparently, when Julian argued earlier that the ends don't justify the means, well, apparently in this case he thought they did. Saving Odo was worth them turning into murderers and then breaking into Quark's and stealing from him. I was very disturbed by this episode. It seemed like Julian and O'Brien had no conscience, and it also seemed like Sisko was endorsing that behavior tacitly, but still he allowed them to do it. I did not like this episode at all. It actually made me think less of these characters, the way that they behaved. I think this was that slippery slope that you were talking about earlier, as far as where including something like Section 31 into the Star Trek universe, where it actually gets you. It gets you to a compromise of principles, and Julian and Miles were turned into what I consider to be heartless, amoral, or even immoral, disgusting characters.
Yeah, I'm not sure they're amoral, but there certainly seems to be an immorality that started to inject itself. And I don't understand, at this point in the timeline, this is after the original series, this is after The Next Generation. I don't understand why so many people embrace this Section 31. What Secret Hideout did, although the stories written here were competently done, there was narrative there were characterizations, unlike what Secret Hideout can do. So from a television production point of view, what was done here was much, 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 much better than Secret Hideout. But you already introduced this idea. So I don't understand when people complain about the Section 31 in Discovery. I'm guessing they're just complaining at how stupid they are, not the concept itself. The fact that they take Georgiou, Space Hitler, and introduce and bring her in. Well, why wouldn't they bring her in? I mean, given what they set up in Deep Space Nine, that's completely consistent with that sort of immorality. It is an immoral thing. Amoral means they're beyond morality. They know this is wrong. Otherwise, why would they be secret in Deep Space Nine? They know this is wrong, but they still do it.
Well, they knew it was against the rules. I don't think they thought what they were doing was wrong. That's the problem. Because they didn't tell Sisko at the beginning because they knew he would have to report what was going on. That was why they didn't tell him. Because they knew it was against Starfleet and Federation law.
When you say they, you mean O'Brien?
O'Brien and Bashir.
Right. I was talking about just the Federation and Starfleet in general. They know this is wrong, otherwise they wouldn't hide this organization. So they know this is wrong, but they're doing it. So they're not amoral, they're immoral. They know it's wrong, but they're going to do it anyway.
Again, I don't know if that's actually the case, though. I don't know that they do know that that's wrong. I think they'll give it lip service because they know it's illegal.
Because Odo's idea of, well, the Romulans have this and the Cardassians have this. Well, right, but the Romulans also have disruptors that can kill somebody in a very painful way, and the Federation chose not to use weapons like that. Just because your enemy does something doesn't mean you have to do the same thing. I understand that there needs to be espionage of sorts to keep yourself apprised of what's happening around you with other countries, or in this case, other planetary systems. And that's what Starfleet intelligence is for. So if this was just a story about Starfleet intelligence who answered through the chain of command, I probably would be, well, it's a little bit kind of 20th century spy-like, but okay. But making it this rogue agency, it feels like it was somebody who really liked the James Bond type spy stuff. And they just liked that, and they said, well, let's introduce that to Star Trek. I realize that a lot of our viewership here is not going to like our take on this, but this setup here, it's consistent with what they tried to do in Secret Hideout. They just did it incompetently. People must be okay with the concept of Section 31. Having Space Hitler and having her join must be fine. It's just that she's stupid and them having that yum yum and all that stuff running around. It's the stupidity of how they did it. They have a secret badge, but it's not a secret badge. Everybody knows that's Section 31. That's all I can think of is people are just okay with Section 31. They just don't like how stupidly it was done in Secret Hideout. And this upcoming movie looks to be stupid. Now, I know you're getting ready to talk about the Enterprise episodes that had Section 31. And I was a bit more okay with that. In the timeline, I am okay with the concept earlier in the timeline. And you could say, well, Discovery was earlier in the timeline. Sure. But it wasn't done in a very intelligent way, where in Enterprise, I think they did do a little bit of reining it in a little bit, because earlier in the timeline, before the original series, as the Federation is being formed and they're trying to figure out how to do things, I can understand bringing some of that 20th century stuff and trying to apply it. So Section 31 in Enterprise to me wasn't as damning of a thing, but once you got to the TOS era, and the way that world was set up, that universe was set up, I just don't see Deep Space Nine as taking a step backwards, in my opinion, in the timeline after TOS doing this sort of Section 31 stuff. This should have burnt itself out in the Enterprise era, and that should have been the end of it, if you had to do it.
Obviously, I'm going to go through a synopsis of what happened in these Enterprise episodes, but just as a precursor to follow up with what you just said, the portrayal of Section 31 was softened in Enterprise, which I think might have something to do with when this series aired in a post-certain event world that we all know about, that I won't mention that here because YouTube's funny that way. That might have been the impetus as to why they softened the reputation of Section 31 going forward, at least at that point in time, so that people would have a better opinion of it, so they wouldn't appear to be so disgusting.
And then you'd start questioning what was happening in the real world if they made them disgusting like they did in the late 90s with Deep Space Nine.
You got it. So, here we go with the Enterprise episodes. Season 4, episodes 15 and 16. 15 being Affliction, 16 being Divergence. This is the first time we see Section 31 in Enterprise. Dr. Phlox is kidnapped and forced to fix a virus that is killing Klingons. The Klingons were attempting to genetically enhance themselves using human augments as a blueprint. The Klingons were sloppy, and a virus got into their medical trials and began to spread and kill every Klingon who had become infected. In the episode, we learn that Lieutenant Malcolm Reed used to be part of Section 31. Reed is manipulated by Section 31 into delaying the Enterprise's investigation into Phlox's disappearance. Dr. Phlox manages to cure the virus, but strip out the augmentation, thus resulting in Klingons having a more human appearance, which bridges the difference in the look of the Klingons between the original series and the Next Generation. Section 31 is happy because the Klingon Empire has been stabilized and probably won't be experimenting with genetic augmentation again anytime soon. Lieutenant Reed is angry about being used and tells Section 31 to never contact him again. They tell him that recruitment in Section 31 doesn't work that way. In that episode, Section 31 appeared more like, I think, what we would want a James Bond-like spy organization or intelligence organization to work like. That they're interest was purely in stabilizing the Klingon Empire so that there wouldn't be a vacuum of power, there wouldn't be fighting, basically to stop war. Even though in the episode, Malcolm was angry that Section 31 was basically taking orders from Klingons because they were trying to do what was in the Klingons' best interest and how they wanted it done. The viewer can see why that would be done that way and how it actually benefited the Federation to do it that way. And there didn't really appear to be too much moral ambiguity in that episode other than Lieutenant Malcolm Reed having to lie to Captain Archer and to basically sabotage their investigation. This was minor compared to what Dr. Bashir and Chief O'Brien did to Sloan in that last episode of Deep Space Nine where Section 31 appeared. They wanted to soften Section 31 in Enterprise. So I think that the viewer would be more accepting of organizations that work that way. Just my thoughts on that.
The Enterprise episodes, not only did I think that they were a better portrayal of a Section 31, honestly, I thought they were better episodes. They were better stories. I was able to stay more engaged with the Enterprise episodes than I did with the Deep Space Nine Section 31 episodes. But again, I realize that that's a matter of taste.
True, but I don't disagree with what you just said. So, for the final pair of episodes in Enterprise where Section 31 appeared, they were Enterprise Season 4, Episode 20 and Episode 21, Demons and Terra Prime. A woman gives to Paul a lock of hair and then dies. Dr. Phlox runs the hair's DNA and learns there's a child whose parents are Trip and T'Pol. In order to get more information, Captain Archer has Lieutenant Reed reach out to his Section 31 contact. Reed learns that the woman was a member of a group called Terra Prime that wants to stop all contact with alien species because aliens are corrupting the human way of life. Section 31 suspects Terra Prime is planning something that has to do with the child. Reed is told if he finds the child, he'll have his answers. When Terra Prime takes over a grid on Mars, Lieutenant Reed gets in touch with Section 31 for help infiltrating the group's compound, which his Section 31 contact provides. The crew of the Enterprise use this information to take down the Terra Prime group. Unfortunately, the cloning method used by Terra Prime to create Trip and T'Pol's baby was flawed, and the infant dies. But Dr. Phlox assures Trip that it is highly likely that a human and a Vulcan could theoretically conceive healthy offspring. And that is pretty much it for appearances of Section 31 prior to J.J. Abrams and Alex Kurtzman.
It's a good thing Vulcans and humans can have babies, because Spock is probably pretty happy about that.
I think we're all happy about that. But again, in this episode, Section 31 was a supporting role as far as providing information that would allow the crew of the Enterprise to put a stop to a terrorist group that was essentially threatening the life of every alien on Earth at that point in time. And they did it in a way that wasn't sinister or immoral. This made them look like an intelligence organization who knew what was going on and not like a bunch of crazy Sloans running around committing genocide.
Those Deep Space Nine episodes, if I'm remembering correctly, the first episode was in 1998, I think. Maybe 97, I don't remember exactly. And I think the problem I have with this concept, outside of what we talked about for Section 31, is the Enterprise series was after Deep Space Nine in our real world, but in the timeline of Star Trek, it was before Deep Space Nine.
Well, in the timeline of Star Trek, well, the original timeline, it took place before all of the other series.
And I think the issue I have is the real world timeline. The two-part episodes you just talked about. Again, I know I bring this up a lot, and it's not unique to this series, but Home Guard. Like, that whole RoboCop thing, it reminded me of Home Guard from Babylon 5, if anybody remembers that storyline. And then that first episode with Bashir, it reminded me of a combination of the episode Eyes from Babylon 5 and the sky was full of stars. I think that was the title of the episode. Kind of combined together because they had Sinclair in a neural net kind of matrixy type place to try to get information out of him about what happened at the Battle of the Line. And then Eyes was an investigation into Sinclair's past and trying to paint him as disloyal. Now, I realize there's a wrinkle here. They were doing this, Sloan was doing this to try to force Bashir to join him. And I realize this is touchy ground, and I'm going to be just nice about this, and hopefully we don't have a bunch of blowback from this. But I had a problem with Deep Space Nine from almost the get-go because of the history with JMS trying to sell the series to Paramount in '89, and then how things spun off from there. And so many people think because Deep Space Nine made it on television first, that Babylon 5 copied them, and that's not at all what happened. Paramount had a better infrastructure in place, so they were able to take concept to series and get it on TV much, much, much faster than what JMS could do at Babylon 5. And there's just so much of Star Trek from Deep Space Nine on that I feel is derived from Babylon 5 stuff. That
even down to the names of characters.
Yes.
I mean, Dukat appeared in both. And I'm not blaming the writers of Deep Space Nine for going and stealing all these names from Babylon 5. I'm willing to bet they had no idea that this was actually taken from somebody else's idea. They were probably given these things and said, here, write this up.
Well, Lita, I believe, is another name that's shared between the two series. And
yeah, there's a number of them.
So, again, I realize that a lot of our viewership here is Star Trek people, and I'm a Star Trek person too, but I think I've made it clear I'm a TOS and TNG person. That's where I feel the strongest as far as the loyalty to the brand. And so Deep Space Nine already was on thin ice with me with the Babylon 5 stuff, because I think Babylon 5 told these stories much better. I think they told the stories of being infiltrated, of having rogue agencies. I think, was it Bureau 13, I think, is what Babylon 5's Earth Alliance had as their Section 31, if I'm remembering from Season 1. Maybe that was Season 2. And I don't know. I don't want to turn this into a Babylon 5 versus Deep Space Nine. Star Trek to me is TOS and TNG. That is what it is to me. And there's not a place for a Section 31 in that universe for me. So Deep Space Nine, although they had some very fine stories, they had some very fine acting done in that series, there's a taint to it. And I try really hard to just kind of go on and concentrate on the positive things, concentrate on all the positive pieces of Deep Space Nine, which there are quite a bit. So I'm not saying Deep Space Nine doesn't have a lot of good things.
Yeah, because the shows were not identical. And clearly, after the initial concept, they did diverge. So they became two very different shows. However, when you look at the basis for both, yeah, you can see where they still stem from the same idea.
Well, even those later seasons of Deep Space Nine still felt like there were still Babylon 5 concepts that were...
Well, the whole basis of the show was a Babylon 5. Was Babylon 5.
Well, sure. But what I'm saying is, yes, they did diverge after that first season. But even after that first season, I still felt there were some story elements in Deep Space Nine that were set up in Babylon 5 first.
Yes.
And maybe one day we'll make a video about that, but I don't want to do that because I know we could enrage a large part of our audience. Because a large part of our audience, I don't think, knows the story of what happened with Babylon 5 and Deep Space Nine, and they're probably not going to believe us. All I can say is just go online and do the research, and you can find out what happened.
Yeah.
So that's why Deep Space Nine to me, people often ask me, well, why isn't Deep Space Nine your favorite? Well, that's one of the major reasons. Plus, TOS and TNG has that Roddenberry feel, especially early TNG. And that's what I got drawn to with Star Trek. I grew up watching TOS. And so that Roddenberry universe is what I'm tied to, not the Berman era stuff. That's stuff that was tacked on later.
One of my issues with Deep Space Nine was definitely the inclusion of Section 31, because Section 31 makes the Federation and Starfleet into something other than what it was previously. And to me, what it had been previously was a glowing future that we could look forward to, where we'd solved our petty, stupid problems, and we were actually striving for a better society. We didn't have things like clandestine organizations where they committed genocide like Section 31.
Section 31's existence goes back to when they had eugenics wars, when they had all the horrible stuff that almost destroyed Earth in the Star Trek timeline.
Exactly.
That's why to me it seems like it's going backwards when you're doing all that.
Yes.
By doing that, you're doing exactly what almost caused the planet to destroy itself in the first place.
Yes, and in TOS, they were beyond that. So they certainly should have still been beyond that by the time Deep Space Nine took place in the timeline. And then to include something like that, yeah, it's not Roddenberry Trek anymore. And I can see it happening in a show like Babylon 5. But Babylon 5 is not Star Trek. And I like my Star Trek to be more of a future to aspire to, not just more of the same politics and immoral crap that we have now.
And that's what I was saying earlier. The stuff that Secret Hideout built on, other than it was done in a very amateur way, it fits right in with the Deep Space Nine universe. It does. It's not done nearly as slick. See, I'm not trying to bash Deep Space Nine, because that was done, most of that series was put together really well. And there was good acting in there, good storylines in there. Deep Space Nine was a really well put together series. But what I'm saying is the concepts that they ham-fistedly did in Discovery, a lot of those tie back to Deep Space Nine. I'm not talking necessarily the timeline, because Discovery happened in the timeline first. I'm just saying they were introduced in 1998, if we're talking Section 31. And what Discovery's doing, one could make an argument that this is all consistent with what they did in Deep Space Nine. It's just Deep Space Nine did it much better. Was Sloan really any different than Georgiou?
Well, that's where I was about to go.
Other than he wasn't Space Hitler in a mirror universe, his moral compass is right there with Empress Georgiou or Emperor Georgiou.
Yes, exactly. That's what I was going to say, that the portrayal of Section 31 in Deep Space Nine, which was viewed by our protagonists, Sisko and the like, as being a bad organization. Genocide was seen as the wrong thing to do. Not only in Discovery were they genocidal, they weren't really portrayed as this organization that needed to be rooted out and eliminated, if you see what I'm saying.
I do.
And now they're making this movie about it, and I can't wait to see what they give us in this movie, because the trailer looked like a combination of the Suicide Squad and Guardians of the Galaxy.
Yeah. Again, to be fair, because I don't want to lump Deep Space Nine in with Secret Hideout, saying those are essentially the same thing, because they're not.
No.
Deep Space Nine has very good stories. There are many episodes of Deep Space Nine that I do watch every couple of years over again because they're that good.
And like I pointed out, the portrayal of Section 31 in Deep Space Nine and Discovery was very similar as far as being a horrible genocidal organization.
Right. The portrayal...
The reception of Section 31 was very different as far as the characters that were living on board Deep Space Nine versus those on Discovery.
Right. I wanted to make sure, even though we're comparing the Section 31s, Section 31 in Deep Space Nine isn't all that different than Discovery's Section 31, but I'm just trying to make a distinction. Outside of the Section 31 stuff, I'm not trying to compare Discovery with Deep Space Nine, because Deep Space Nine is a much, 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 much better series.
Yes.
Because I can already picture people listening to our video going, they're trying to say that Deep Space Nine and Discovery are the same thing. They're not. They're absolutely not. I can watch many episodes, not the Section 31 episodes, mind you, but I can watch many episodes of Deep Space Nine over and over again. Whereas Discovery, I do not want to watch any of the episodes over again.
Yeah.
We're only comparing the Section 31 portrayal. Specifically, when you look at Sloane from Deep Space Nine, and you look at Georgiou and whatever other Section 31 pieces we've seen, they're really not all that different. They're really not.
Well, Yum Yum, when, what's his name? Oh, crap, I can't remember his name.
Leland?
Yes, Leland, thank you. When Leland got blown up or eviscerated, whatever you want to say happened to that guy. And, just the Section 31 portrayal in Discovery, I don't know why anybody would want to watch a movie based on that group. But then again, I never understood how they so easily rehabilitated Georgiou. The woman was a monster.
I don't think they did rehabilitate her.
I mean, as far as the audience's acceptance of her.
But I don't think they did. What I'm proposing is people in 2025 seem to be fine with moral grayness. And I'm being kind by saying moral grayness because I think Georgiou is evil. Mm-hmm. And people seem to be fine with that now. I've had this conversation in several of our videos when we start talking about the Geneva Convention and we start talking about war crimes, because Discovery's full of war crimes. And there are people that are just shrug their shoulders and say, well, that's an outdated concept. You need to get beyond that. And that's the society I think a lot of people live in. I mean, that's what I think normies are. I'm going to be kind and say I think normies are lacking some sort of ethical compass. And I'd like to think that's specifically limited to normies, but I'm not sure that's 100% the case.
I think this goes back to our Mr. Brightside video, that the overwhelming majority, and again, I have no numbers to back this up, but this is just my opinion and my own feelings on what I've observed of other people, that the majority of people, I don't think that they actually pay attention and think about things for themselves. Like, they don't listen to the lyrics. They just go with how the melody makes them feel. They don't actually think about it. And I think that a lot of people, they don't actually think about things. They just accept, well, my authority figure told me that this was a good thing, so it's a good thing. And they're never going to think about it for themselves as far as what they think, what their morals are. Do they actually think that was a right behavior? Do they think that that's how society should work? And it reminds me of something from The Hogfather. And if you've never seen the Hogfather movie, at the end, Death, the personification of death, the hooded figure with the scythe, he explains to his adopted granddaughter,
"You need to believe in things that aren't true. How else can they become?"
You have to believe in things that aren't real, because how else are they to become real? Things like justice. In order to do that, you have to think about these things. Is this a right behavior? Do you think this is justice? Is this justice? Or is this just vengeance? Is this retribution? I mean, is this a right behavior?
Well, when you go back to TNG, and the book ends of Encounter at Farpoint and All Good Things, and the whole concept was Q was putting humanity on trial.
Oh, yes, he was.
And some of the Deep Space Nine Section 31 stuff, as well as what they're doing in Discovery, if you had Q bookend things again and judge humanity, we would be guilty of atrocities. What was Picard's response to that? I'm thinking he said something like, yes, we had atrocities in our past, but judge us how we are now, or something like that. Well, okay, let's look at what they're going to be putting out here with this Section 31 series. If you judge by what they're putting out now, Q would fail humanity because we're doing the same thing we did in our horrible past that Picard said was behind us.
Well, it also comes back to, okay, so you look at what Julian and Miles did to Sloane. The guy ends up dead, but they get the cure, and they cure Odo, which leads to a cure for all of Odo's kind, thus putting a stop to genocide. Okay, so did the needs of that many outweigh the needs of the few or the one Sloane? And I know a lot of people would say, yes, it did.
I think they would make the argument, by they, I mean the people who would support the Deep Space Nine storyline, and they would point out, but the Jem'Hadar and the founders were trying to wipe out everything. And so when you're fighting for your life, then you can do whatever you need to do to survive. In a couple of different storylines in Deep Space Nine, they tried to cover that, even just outside the Section 31 stuff. But Sisko had to make a hard decision on doing something. Again, I would go back and say, I think the ends justify the means. I think that does matter, but that's, again, coming from a Roddenberry basis type series. But that's what people would say. I can already hear them typing in the comments. You don't understand. They were in the middle of a war, and during a war, you have to have exceptional things, and da-da-da-da-da, and they would just go on and on and on about that.
So might makes right, and ideals don't matter.
When I guess you're being exterminated, it's important that you lower yourself to your enemies.
What does that make you?
I have an opinion of that.
How does that make you any different or any more deserving of life than your enemy?
Because they're the good guys and they're the bad guys. It goes down to stupidity like that.
Yeah.
Because then you look at, there's no real difference between the means that you'll use. If under duress, anything is on the table to do, then I don't even know why a society would exist then. You're just going to blow yourself up.
Yes.
Because it goes back to Discovery when Georgiou and part of Starfleet was going to allow her to set up a bomb to blow up the Klingon homeworld. There's no concept of war crimes or things that go beyond tactics in a war that make you accountable for crimes against, humanity, or in this case, sentience. There's no such concept of that in Star Trek, and I would argue, starting with Deep Space Nine, they introduced the little concept of the door opening about that. And I can already hear the people listening to our video, and they're upset. Deep Space Nine is their favorite Star Trek series, and I'm glad you like Deep Space Nine. There was a lot to like in Deep Space Nine. I just don't think Section 31 is one of the things that people should be liking. Even if done, quote-unquote, competently, the way Section 31 was eventually done in Deep Space Nine after that first episode they were introduced, I wouldn't want to get behind that concept. I would want to say, yeah, that's one of the mistakes Deep Space Nine did.
I agree.
But here we are. Now we've got this Section 31 movie that's coming out next week. And as stupidly as it's going to be done, because I agree, it looks like some bizarre knockoff of Guardians of the Galaxy and Suicide Squad mixed with whatever came in Discovery with Georgiou. This is what people deserve. This is Section 31. Any atrocities that they do in this film, okay, there's your Section 31. I hope you like them. This is what you wanted. You wanted this intelligence agency that was answerable to nobody. This is what you wanted. This was not set up in Discovery. This started in Deep Space Nine. So here you go.
Yeah. I'm not sure I have anything else to say about that.
I think I've spoken my piece and probably gotten many people irritated listening to us.
So anyway, thank you for listening to our synopsis on Section 31's appearances in actual Star Trek.
We will be back next week for that horrible Section 31 film.
Until then,
take care.